Utopia, a story by Corvus, which is me. Nazir loved the fragrance of Malika's hair. He would never ask her which of the creams and lotions that she kept in jars and flacons on the vanity in her bathroom created that wonderful scent. He would rather imagine that it was simply herself who smelled so sweet. He stretched himself comfortably, bringing his nose closer to her head, which lay heavily on his bare chest. The sun was warm on his skin, the sea breeze made the oppressive heat endurable, and the boat rocked gently in the calm sea. Nazir caressed the soft skin of Malika's arm. She kissed his throat and let down her head again. Lazily, Nazir opened his eyes just wide enough to see that the display was still illuminated in amber. The fishing net was fine, and the pilchards were taking their time. He was okay with that. They might just as well enjoy today's fine weather. They probably liked a calm day like this better than a storm on the Atlantic. The waves slapped quietly against the boat's hull as the swell of the sea rushed against the rocks on the beach. A crunching sound came from the fishnet's attachment. Suddenly, Nazir noticed a different sound. A metallic clicking became louder. Nazir had been going to the sea almost every day for 20 years, initially accompanying his father, later, after his father's death, going alone. He had provided for his mother and his siblings until they had finally moved to Casablanca. He still enjoyed fishing, even though the profit from selling his catch was less than what Malika made with her programming job. But nothing topped freshly caught fish on the supper table. Besides, Nazir loved the time he spent on his boat. He could read how the weather developed from the shape of the clouds. He knew the hundreds of shades of the desert sand which was blown to the sea by the easterly wind. He knew from the tinges of the waves where the current had driven them from. And so, because he was familiar with the sounds of the sea, he knew that this noise was neither caused by fish, nor by waterfowl, nor by another boat. He opened his eyes, carefully pulling Malika to the side, which made her sit quietly in protest. He sat up. A European chopper approached from land. This in itself was not unusual, as the Europeans often flew over the city of Casablanca and the surrounding areas. No one knew why they did that, but their bird-like aircraft with the angled wings didn't bother anyone. At least, not very much. Granted, the illuminated plates under the wings could be annoying at night, and sometimes people felt observed, but to Nazir's knowledge, the Europeans never responded when hailed on the radio. They avoided other air traffic, and the stories of chopper crews leaving their craft were relayed by storytellers rather than by news presenters. They were like the big vultures of the desert. One could see them in the sky, but they did not interfere with the people living on the ground. Usually the choppers moved around as soundlessly as the vultures, but this one caused a hissing noise mixed with a metallic clicking which had caught Nazir's attention before. And if he had not been mistaken, he sat up completely, which caused a louder protest from Malika. She rolled to the side and rested her head against a bundle of rope. She was so beautiful. The soft curve of her brows, the golden blossom in her tiny nose, the olive complexion of her skin, the full lips. But something was wrong with the European chopper. Nasir had been right, it was trailing a cloud of smoke, and it was spinning towards the ground. The choppers normally moved independently of the laws of aerodynamics, straight as an arrow into any direction, even more agile than a helicopter. Nasir's second youngest brother, who was a pilot himself, kept on raving about them. But this chopper spiraled to the ground, and the smoke it was trailing became thicker and darker. "It will crash!" Nasir jumped up, which caused the boat to rock. "What?" Malika asked. "The European!" Nasir moved 2 meters towards the bow of the boat to the control panel, as if from there he might be able to see better what happened on the beach. The chopper hovered. It even gained a few meters of altitude. Had Nasir been mistaken? Malika rubbed the sleep from her eyes. She leaned against him, so he would put his arm around her shoulders. He noticed her scan, but just at the edge of his awareness, as he was fascinated by what was happening. A European having problems with his aircraft? Was that even possible? Nasir knew his own craft very well, the engine, the hydrojets, the sonar. He repaired everything, and he always tinkered with it in order to improve it. Other fishermen often asked him to help with the electronics of their boats. Compared to that, the European technology seemed like the magic of jinns. Was it even possible for something as advanced as that to fail? Nasir gazed along the coast towards the distant silhouettes of Casablanca's skyscrapers. They were alone with the chopper. There was no boat and no other aircraft. A bright flash at the chopper made Nasir blink and startled Malika. The craft fell like a stone and crashed onto the earth behind the embankment, causing a rolling thunder and a billowing cloud of dust. Nasir touched the sensor for the emergency start. The net was automatically disconnected. It was left behind with the signal buoy. The hydrojets jerked the boat forward so suddenly that Malika almost fell, but Nasir held her safely. "What are you doing?" she asked. "We need to help him." Nasir knew this part of the coast well. The rocks could pierce the hull of the boat, but they also formed natural landings. He steered the boat through one of the channels, killed the engine, fetched one of the ropes, which were tied to the railing, and waited impatiently while the boat drifted towards the rocks. He jumped out and moored the boat to an upright stone. Malika handed him the medkit, which she had pulled from its compartment. He helped her ashore, and then he started towards the crash site. He was faster than her. Sitting at a computer all day made her a bit sluggish. "Be careful," she called out. "By the grace of Allah. Remember what happened to your father." Nasir knew, of course, how dangerous the Europeans were. Their continent was a single huge fortress. Europe, the forbidden country. Who didn't dream of the wonders behind the wall of blue-gray plastic which marked its shorelines? Nasir's father had succumbed to this temptation. The laser light from the watchtowers had incinerated him, just like thousands of others whose dreams were stronger than their common sense. On top of the embankment, Nasir stopped. The chopper lay tilted upside down, one wing was broken, and there were gashes in the main body. Oily black smoke drifted towards the desert. The fisher took a moment to convince himself that he was not dreaming, and that a European aircraft had really crashed into the sand before him. Breathing heavily, Malika caught up with him. She took his arm. "Somebody needs help there," he said. "You cannot know that." She bent over and braced herself on her knee, but continued to hold his arm. "It might be a drone." Nazir skeptically looked at the wreck. Jets sprayed smothering foam which reduced the smoke. "Is there anyone?" he called. "Can we help?" "Europeans can help themselves." Malika's awe for the civilization in the north made her voice tremble. She had visited the abandoned enclave of Melilla, not just as a tourist, but had also volunteered to help with the excavations. She still followed the publications and speculations about the mysterious artifacts which had been found there. But the Europeans were humans, not angels. Nazir freed himself from his wife's grip and approached the chopper. "We want to help," he called out. A snapping sound made him stop. The sound had not been caused by a weapon being aimed at him, but by the cooling of the blue-black metal of the chopper's hull. He swallowed and moved on. Seen from up close, the damage looked a lot worse than before, even though the foam had fulfilled its purpose and had smothered the smoke. With its broken wing, the craft reminded Nazir of a crippled bird. Red liquid was seeping out. It certainly was some kind of fuel or grease, but it looked like blood. Bent metal struts were jutting out like broken bones. Smaller debris was littered around. Lights flickered inside. Nazir went halfway around the wreck and bent down to peer inside through one of the larger gashes. "Hello? Is there anybody?" Suddenly a circular hatch opened. As the chopper lay almost on its roof, the opening was 2 meters above ground, pointing diagonally upwards. Malika stood 5 meters away. She looked worried. Nazir swallowed. He adjusted the medkit's shoulder strap so it would not hamper him when climbing up. He gingerly touched a projecting piece of the hull. The dark metal was still warm, but not hot enough to scorch his skin. He climbed up and pulled himself into the craft. He felt the pulse throbbing in his wrists, and his throat became dry. No one he knew had ever seen the inside of a chopper. The cockpit was 3 meters wide. The pilot's seat had been ripped from its base, which was diagonally above Nazir due to the orientation of the wreck. Lights were flickering on consoles, which were positioned all around. One of the walls was illuminated in pale blue. In the light of the consoles and the wall, Nazir could see the twisted body of the European. He had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, but there the similarity to humans familiar to Nazir ended. Instead of a face, there was a smooth semi-sphere at the front of the head, reflecting the interior of the cockpit and Nazir. There were no ears on the sides of the head, but little chrome dishes. The right arm was shattered. A bone was sticking out through the light grey combination the man was dressed in. Was the pilot male or female? Nasia looked for indications. There was no bulge at the chest, and the shoulders were much wider than the hips. The legs were very short, no longer than Nasia's thighs. The left arm, however, was extremely long. It didn't end in a hand, but in a metal gripping device. Connection! The European zigged with an indistinct voice. Please. Nasia approached the pilot across the tilted floor. He crouched down beside him. He opened the medkit and inspected the broken arm. The bleeding of the wound reassured him. At least this was familiar. But was this the most severe damage? Helping with an internal injury was beyond his means, and if the non-human components of this eerily alien body were injured or damaged, Nasir would not be able to help. Allah, how far have you gone? He murmured. Connection, the European groaned again. I will fix the broken bones. Nasir took a stretch compression bandage from the medkit and held it in front of the reflecting sphere. Then I'll get you out of here and... No! The metal hand suddenly grabbed Nasir's arm, making him cry out. Connection! Need antenna! Outside! Nasir looked at the hatch. I need something to lower you down. I could fetch a rope from my boat. You must... The antenna! Please! My body... Not important. The European released his grip. Nasir stepped back. He was confused. Malika climbed into the cockpit. She stared at the European. The crash will not go unnoticed. She wrapped her arms around herself. It must have been visible from Casablanca. Others will arrive soon, maybe the Algerians. They might try to take him hostage to blackmail Europe. But that would be a disaster. Doubtfully, Nasir looked at the pilot, but it seemed as if he had not heard them. His metal hand operated the touch screens in front of him. Nasir could not imagine what their function was. If the Algerians harmed a European who had suffered an emergency in Morocco, there would be repercussions. Many of them would not care in their thirst for revenge. European weapons had poisoned their homeland and had made Algiers uninhabitable for generations to come. The uprooted people possessed almost nothing besides their bitterness. We should get away, Malika suggested. Out to the sea. We've got nothing to do with this. Here's a human who needs our help. A human? Malika asked. Really? Nasir had to agree that the European looked very alien. He didn't even have a face. But the face was not the essence of a human being. Not the body, but the eternal soul breathed into him by Allah. How should Nasir make it clear to his wife that this was not just about the stranger, but also about themselves? They would suffer if they abandoned a human in need. Nasir would always remember and be ashamed, and so would Malika. She was afraid, but she had a beautiful soul. She would accuse herself once she was safe. "What is your name?" Nasia asked. "Roland," the European answered. This single word, this name, was enough. Malika understood. "What should we do?" she asked. "He said we need to fix the antenna." They climbed out together. Nasia first lowered Malika, then he followed and jumped down onto the ochre-colored sand. The severed antenna was just a few steps away. They fetched the bright metal pole, which didn't bend under its own weight, even though it was 4 meters long. "I wonder what kind of material this is." Malika rapped on it with her painted fingernails. "So light, yet so strong." Her gaze wandered to the wreck. "And how do they keep the choppers airborne? Have they really mastered gravity?" "They would have to be able to flatten space-time." For a moment, Nasia allowed himself to remember the sparkling eyes of his father when he raved about the wonders that were rumored to exist in Europe. Floating houses, connected by airborne waterways. So much snow, one could form statues with bellies as round as a ball from it. Ovens which prepared the most delicious meals automatically. People in Europe stayed healthy forever and lived to the age of 3 centuries. They wore the finest garments, which changed their colors in the sunlight. There were no arguments, no envy, and no scarcity in Europe. Everyone lived as he pleased. This was different from life here in Morocco, where Nasir's uncle had swindled his father out of most of his wealth. "Help me find out where the antenna broke off," he asked. They quickly found the place and used the bandages and threads from the medkit to reconnect the pole. The point where the antenna had been severed lay in the sand, facing downwards, and they were unable to turn the chopper over. A bend remained at the connecting point, so they could point the antenna towards the sky. The metal was connected, that had to suffice. The heat was burning much stronger here than it had been out on the sea. Nasia and Malika were exhausted. Sweat glistened on their bodies and faces. They smiled at each other and took each other's hand. They knew they had done the right thing. "Do you think," Malika asked, "the rescuers from Europe will arrive before the people from Casablanca?" The wrecked chopper lay in a depression, hence the town was invisible from their position. Nasia looked skeptically at the cloudless sky. How far away would the nearest chopper be? How long would it take to get here? Would the Europeans think that the 2 Moroccans were somehow responsible for the crash? And what should they do if angry Algerians arrived first? They would not be able to protect Roland from them. Thoughtfully, Nasia picked up the medkit. He had done as Roland asked, but he had not treated the pilot's wounds. He would at least check whether he was still bleeding. He noticed the worry in Malika's eyes, but she nodded. Nasia climbed back into the cockpit. Roland still lay in the same position. "We fixed the antenna as well as we could." He looked at the European. "Were you able to send a message?" There was no reply. The gorge lights had already been changing during his first visit to the cockpit, but now they looked completely different. A holographic tank displayed a landscape formed by grids, 3-dimensional curves in green and yellow. Nasia took 4 steps across the tilted floor and kneeled next to Roland. Is everything all right with you? The European was still. He neither spoke nor moved. Nasia grabbed his shoulder and gently shook him. Are you awake? I thank you, Moroccan, a voice sounded. It was similar to Roland's, but came from the holographic tank. You have saved my life, but no one has arrived yet. I have left, and you have to leave the chopper as well. Take your wife and get at least 50 meters away. We can't let our technology fall into wrong hands. Nasia's skin crawled. Had a self-destruct sequence been initiated? I need time to get you out of here. Nasia grabbed Roland under his arms. Leave the body. I don't need it anymore. Nasia looked at the display where he read a green confirmation message. Transmission to base station complete. Consciousness completely transferred.